Welcome everybody. This is Heart to Heart, eSeminar number 8. I'm Archbishop Christopher Prowse, and we're learning from each other over these weeks about the great pilgrimage from the heart of God to the heart of humanity, and the heart of humanity back to God through with it in Jesus. Many of you have been very positive in giving us some feedback, and I'm hearing good reports about little Zoom groups meeting up afterwards as well, so that's great. We're all learning together. Now, today, everybody, I want to move away a little bit from the titles that I've used over the last number of weeks, coming from Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Christus Vivit, on youth, Christ is alive. I'll put them aside. We have 3 more sessions, and I want to pick out of the many topics that I could choose on meditation, contemplation, the great pilgrimage into the heart of God. I want to pick out 3 topics that I feel that they really must be there, and I wouldn't want us to be meditating and making this inward pilgrimage in this COVID-19 time without having these topics in mind. So the first topic today is the topic of the poor as God's microphone. The poor as God's microphone. Meditating in the presence of God's poor. And let me explain it first of all by saying, I've been over the years to a lot of retreats, seminars, symposia on meditation. I often have found that generally it's Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, middle class, bit on the elderly side like me. And I wouldn't want us to think that meditation and pilgrimage is something that's middle class. Of course, middle class, like myself, always welcome. But there are some areas that we don't want to miss out on. And what I want to talk about today is how the poor, those on the periphery of life, can really help us to pray. I'm going to make a number of little stories from my own personal journey that might be able to help you. But first of all, let's take the example, of course, from Jesus himself and begin our time together by looking at chapter 4 of Luke's Gospel. Now here we have in one chapter, chapter 4 of Luke's Gospel, exactly what I'm saying. The link between prayer and meditation and our preference, our preferential option, our loving concern to make sure we're praying along with the poor of the world. Because at the first part of chapter 4 of Luke, Jesus goes away and meditates. We find this so often, don't we, in the Gospel? Jesus sort of excuses himself and off he goes, and he goes away somewhere on meditation to be alone with his Father in silence, simplicity and stillness. And we find that for 40 days and 40 nights he does that on his big retreat, I suppose you'd call it, before his public ministry begins. And as soon as he comes off the retreat, he then goes into the synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth. He opens up the scriptures and he reads out the scripture that would become, in his mind and our mind now as his church, our mission statement. And he reads out, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because the Spirit has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, to release the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. May the words of the Gospel wipe away our sins. And we are remaining in a sinful state if we have this idea that we'll just say our prayers and the poor can continue to be poor and we won't have much to do with them at all. That's not gospel. It's we're caught up in some other agenda, but it's not scriptural. And when I think of it myself, my meditation and contemplation of my life has actually led me to the poor. And when I've been with the groups that are marginal groups, periphery groups, I've found that they've really helped me to pray. It's not as if I'm going there to help the poor are actually helping me. So let me give you some examples. First of all, last year, all the bishops of Australia, we were in Rome. Every 5 or 6 years we have a meeting for a week or two in Rome with the Holy Father and the officers of the Vatican. We finished. I had a spare week before I returned to Australia. So I decided to take a train trip, which I've taken many times over the years, to a family in northern Italy that are like my second family, my Italian family. I stayed with them so often when I studied there. On the way through, and they live up in Treviso, which is north of Venice, I stopped off at Bologna, which is a wonderful medieval town which I haven't really explored much. I've certainly been at their train station often enough. I got out, I spent overnight there, and in the morning I was going to spend a fair bit of the day just looking around. So I was at a cafe place in the busy part of Bologna. I was out, it was a lovely morning. I was outside doing the Aussie thing, the middle class thing, you know, the little table, the cafe latte, Italian made of course, very good baristas. We got good baristas here, but we won't go into that, but you know what I'm getting at. And we had the mandatory dolce, the cakes, the croissant. And I was reading the newspaper of that day, and the newspaper was talking about asylum seekers that had continued over those years to come up from Africa, cross over, very dangerous crossing, into a little island called Lampedusa. And I've got a show and tell here, very catechetical today. This is from the wood from one of the boats that was wrecked when it went from the coast of Africa up to the little Italian island of Lampedusa, which is south of Sicily. And then they get out there and try to seek refuge. So a lot of them have died on the trip, but a lot of them, their little boats were wrecked. The wood from those boats have been collected. They went to the Vatican and they made these crosses. And when I was in Rome a few years ago for another event, Pope Francis himself actually gave myself this cross, which is the wood made from a Lampedusa boat. And I just use it as a way of a show and tell for the story I'm now telling you. So there I'm having my yuppie cup of coffee with my yuppie croissant in a yuppie cafe in the middle of Bologna. I'm reading about the asylum seekers, and then I felt somebody near me, sort of a shadow. I look up and there's this very, very big man just looking at me with his hand out. Very dark-skinned, big man. I thought, saying nothing, just got the hand out. I was speaking to him in Italian and didn't seem to understand much about it. I then spoke to him in English, and he could understand. He was from Nigeria. Now he's one of these asylum seekers. So I said, well, rather than me just give you money, have you had breakfast? No. So we both went in. I said, order anything you want. So he got his breakfast, and we both sat down and we had breakfast together. So for about an hour I was with him, and I learned so much about him. Basically, he said the great poverty from his home country made him try to see his luck in Europe. He made a very dangerous crossing over the Mediterranean Sea. He said, now I'm here, I've got to make a choice. There's 3 things I could do, he said. I could join one of the drug syndicates and make money that way. I could steal, or I could beg. And he said, of the 3, I've chosen the 3rd, beg. So that was his life. We talked about it a fair bit. I learned a lot from him. We had a big breakfast, and then I had to move on. I'll just leave it at that. But he opened up a new part of the world. It was very academic beautiful to receive this cross, but then to actually talk to an asylum seeker in a very dangerous situation and know his life moves you into another world. It certainly helped me in my meditation over the next few days. A second one now. Here's my next show and tell. It's from my Aboriginal friends. Here's the show and tell here, beautiful Aboriginal painted cross. So this is some years ago. I was a priest. It was Easter time. There were about 40 Aboriginal people. They took me They took me out for a few days to a lovely area, a lot of mountains and their sort of Aboriginal territory, they said, their home country, and I was their priest for about 4 days. It was the first time for a long, long time I was about the only Anglo-Saxon amongst Aboriginal people. It's really interesting to live for sometimes with the majority of people Aboriginal and there's only 1 or 2 Anglo-Saxons. So they were very keen for us to celebrate Mass outside, especially at dawn. Now, I was not all that happy about that. Masses outside at dawn, practical problems. But anyway, off we went. And yes, there were all sorts of issues. The middle of the Mass, all these cockatoos went over it, as happens at dawn, and then the sun came over the mountains at some stage of almost blinding us. A couple of kangaroos came and just stopped there for a while, and then they went off, and I thought, we should have had this indoor. All the time there was a fire going. In fact, there was a fire going there for the 4 days non-stop, 24/7. Fire with them. So at the end of the Mass, I said, "Oh, what a beautiful Mass." And I said, "Well, I was very distracted." And they said, "Why?" And I mentioned, "Oh, what do you mean? The cockatoos, they were God's church bells. Did you notice the kangaroos?" Yes, they came, and did you notice how they bowed down and then they went off? They were bowing before the Eucharistic Lord. The sun, no, that was the sun coming down. Did you notice it happened during the Eucharistic prayer? Oh, the fire. Yeah, that's our Paschal candle. They can take away our languages, they can take away this, but they'll never take away our fire. So I thought, oh dear, they never taught me this in the seminary. There was another world, and at the end of the 4 days I felt more of an Australian than I ever have before. The complementarity of the Aboriginal mysticism to the very European mysticism that I'd been brought up in. But they were complementary. One didn't negate the other. That's why I really feel that the Aboriginal people in Australia hold a key to the real Australia we're looking for. We're still young, 200 years only since the first Catholic priest came to this country. This year we're celebrating the bicentennial. So we're still young, but we're in an ancient world. Just before I move on for a moment on that, a year or so later, a couple of them came down to where I was, and we were at a conference, and we had the luncheon break. So a friend of mine, I hope she won't mind me mentioning her name, she's gone to God now anyway, Marjorie Liddy from the Tiwi Islands, a saintly woman. She and I, we went for a bit of a walk around the area, and we came across the cathedral where they'd just put a new beautiful statue of Mary MacKillop. So she saw it and she said, "Oh, what a beautiful statue." And she went up straight away and cuddled the metal statue, cuddling it. "Mother Mary, we love you," she said. She said, "Bishop, come over, cuddle the statue with me." And I thought, oh, not really. And I'm looking to the right and to the left, and I thought, so I went, yes. And I cuddled Mary MacKillop statue with Marjorie Liddy. So I hope you don't feel I'm more stupid than I am, but at any rate, I'm very happy to tell you that, because I felt that she was complimenting again the great Catholic, a Catholic woman through and through, an Aboriginal woman through and through, a mystic through and through, all together in one wonderful woman. And she's now gone to God, and I sometimes pray to her, asking her to help me when I'm having a bad day. I'm sure she's one of those uncanonized saints. So again, I'm trying to indicate to you how the poor help me to pray. And when we think of the scriptures, the Good Samaritan parable comes to my mind immediately. There's a wonderful commentary on the Good Samaritan parable in chapter 10 of Luke, verses 29 to 37, from this wonderful book by Benedict XVI, the Pope Emeritus. And he half wrote this when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger and concluded it when he became the Pope. It's called Pope Benedict XVI, Jesus of Nazareth. There's 3 volumes. This is the first volume and the biggest one. And Janine will put it on the website for you to get the details. But there is a section there, and he gives a commentary on the Good Samaritan, which I'm going to summarise in about 2 minutes. But you know what I'm talking about, don't you? The parable in Luke 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So there we have the man on the road, the Jericho road, beaten up, half dead. A priest and a Levite come by, a bit detour around. I like it when it said by chance a priest came by chance. There's a Samaritan nun, she told me years ago, Good Samaritan nun, that she said that was her favourite, that by chance somebody came along and was given an invitation to help him. This particular person didn't help for quite good reasons when you think of it, explained by Cardinal Ratzinger. But then a Samaritan who you wouldn't expect, the one on the outer, the Aboriginal person came, and he helped. He went out, he dropped his whole daily routine, and this man half dead became his one priority. He saw it as a moral calling, and soothed him with the wounds, with the oil that he had, put him on his donkey, I presume, took him to the inn, and then paid for it, the accommodation, said he would come back and look after and check on him. So Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, the Emeritus Pope, says the Good Samaritan is Jesus. Jesus, the one from Nazareth. What good could come from Nazareth, they said. So in a sense, Jesus was born into a periphery community on the poor. So Jesus himself becomes the Good Samaritan. Shock, shock, shock. Jesus becomes the Aboriginal person, becomes the asylum seeker. Secondly, the man half dead becomes us, unredeemed humanity. Half dead. We're incomplete without Jesus. We're only living half our humanity. With Jesus it's all complete. And then takes him to the inn and says, look after him, care for him, heal him, and I'll come back and check on you later on. The inn becomes a symbol of the church. A symbol of the church. The church is the healing church. That's the word Pope Francis calls it, the field hospital, looking after those that have been discarded by the rest of society. In these days of COVID-19, mental illness is very big, loneliness is very big, isolation. Field hospital, that's who we are. The telephone call, helping out practically. Can we do the shopping? Being there to have a sense of the closeness of Jesus to people in isolation. So just, I found that in that Good Samaritan parable, and those quick insights that I've just summarised, the tip of the iceberg from Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, we find that we have a synthesis of it all. And it all goes back to meditating, but at the same time, seeing in our meditation the moral impulse to see Christ in the disfigured nature that he comes to us every day in different ways. We learn to go out to those in that disfigured form, whatever it is, and those that we go out to help us to pray. There's a cycle. Anyway, everybody, I might leave it at that, but you might want to think about that over the next period of time. So we've got 3 questions now, and if you want to, on the live chat, give some response to what I've said, well and good. But the 3 questions, in my mind at least, summarise the essence of what I've just tried to share in the last 20 minutes. So the first one, explore the links between prayer and service to the poor. Give examples from your own life. The links between prayer and service to the poor. I've just given you some links with the asylum seeker and with the two Aboriginal experiences. What personal insights do you have from meditating on the Good Samaritan parable? As I've just explained it to you, and you would have meditated on this, you would know the parable, of course, is one of the most popular parables in the Gospels. What are your thoughts on it? And how can you see the link between meditation and service to the poor there? And how have the poor helped you? How have the asylum seekers, the Aboriginals, the people in your neighbourhood, people with mental health issues, people in your own family who are struggling, or the brokenness, the shame, the humility of people, and humiliation of people. How have they helped you to be a better prayer and a better Christian, a witness to the resurrection? I wonder if you could think about that over the next period of time. Yes, I can still think of some other examples as I'm just waiting for some feedback. For instance, I know this is a bit middle class for me to say, but there was a time when I was poor on a certain level, and let me share that with you briefly. I was in Rome, I just started in Rome. I'd already done a language course in the Italian language for a little while, but I thought it was enough, but it wasn't. So there I was on my first day for 2 or 3 years in Rome in my first time there, and there's 100 people there, and there's an Italian comes in, he's talking in Italian for 45 minutes, a break, another 45 minutes, and unfortunately I could understand a little bit of what he said, but not enough. And I had a piece of paper, an exercise book and a biro, and I was trying to write things, and there was I couldn't even, I mean the words I could see, but I couldn't put them together. And I realised I'm not baked enough. I should have been in the oven a bit more with this Italian language. I can order a cappuccino, I can order spaghetti bolognese or something, but that's about it. And I looked around and people writing furiously, and there was a person beside me writing in English. So I asked this person at the break, would you help me? And the person said no. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, the next day I was quite depressed about this. I thought I'm going to spend 2 years not understanding anything. And I was at another class, and there was a priest beside me. He also was writing in English. So at the break I said to him, I can see you have no trouble with the Italian. No, he says, I've been here a few years. I said, well, I've been here 5 minutes. I said, I don't understand a thing. And I said, I'm sorry for saying this, but would you mind if I could borrow your notes for a while to help me? And he looked into my eyes and he said, of course, please. And from then on, I felt he really sort of took me on to shepherd me a little bit. And fortunately, we're at a number of classes together, so I was able to help him. And after a period of time, I didn't need the notes. It helped. It was okay. But he's now a good friend of mine, and I'm sure he's from Scotland, Father Willie McFadden, and he's been listening to these heart to hearts, and he's with some of his parishioners from Scotland. So, to you, dear Father Willie, thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be able to tell other people of your kindness to me. And he's come to Australia a few times. I've been to his place in Scotland a few times. I don't know how his Scottish parishioners are understanding me, because I can barely understand their Scottish accent. How can they understand my Australian accent? But they're obviously, like Father Willie, very patient. So there's one little story. Another little story that I'd just like to mention, as you might want to reflect on the chat room if you wish, is World Youth Day 08 in Sydney. And we had the cross and the icon, the big pilgrim cross and the icon of Mary going all around Australia before that happened. And I was in Melbourne at the time, and we took the cross and the icon into a very big prison down there. And there were about 40 prisoners. I'll never forget the day. So in comes the icon, and in comes the big cross. So I had the honour of leading the little paraliturgy, the little liturgical moment. And at one stage I asked the prisoners if they wanted to come up and reverence the cross in any way that they wished. I was wondering if I'd get any customers at all to come up, but they all wanted to come up. And not only that, they came up with so much reverence. The way they held the cross and brought it to either their lips or their head or their heart. I was sitting back there looking at this, and I was feeling, I am really being helped to pray by looking at these periphery people, prisoners, and the way they're coming and placing their burdens onto the Calvary cross and receiving a blessing. And at the end, before we left, one of them stood up and he thanked us for coming. There was about 10 of us who came. On behalf of the 40 prisoners, he thanked us for taking the time. He said, for not forgetting about us. He said, we have done bad things. That's why most of us are here. But we're not bad people. And we're really searching for the Lord and hungry for him. and you've really given us wonderful food for our hearts today. Thank you. It was a wow moment. Talk about helping me to pray. That was my prayer buzz, echoing, resonating in my heart for days and days afterwards. And now, even as I'm telling you, in a sort of a testimony way, it still fills me with great joy. And that's 2008, so 12 years ago. So that's another expression of the poor helping us to pray, and our prayer being enriched so much that we go out to those on the periphery and find a home there. So let's see now. Love, is a bit of feedback. Love the definition of church as field hospital. Well, thank you. I presume, I haven't made that up, I presume you know that comes from Pope Francis. Soon after he was made the Pope, he talked about, he says, my dream for the church is to be like a field hospital after a battle. He said, if the church is a field hospital after the battle of life, we're not too fussed about, exact blood pressure, or not too fussed about whether or not your cholesterol level's a bit high, or your diabetes is a bit low or a bit too high. We're just there to help people, to heal the wounds that are in front of us. So he's trying to move away from a church that is overly introvert, overly rigorous on legalisms, so much so that the ones that are needing the healing power of Jesus are often eclipsed. So I've used this image recently in my archdiocese here in regard to the COVID-19 crisis. Then I said, well, the churches are locked and closed. We're only just starting to unlock them now, and the doors just creaked open a little bit, only for a certain number of people coming in. But the idea is that let's see ourselves as a field hospital. If people are in isolation, let the field hospital draw the closeness of Jesus to our people. Let's not be too fussed about whether we can't do this and can't do that. It can be quite selfish. In the end, our meditation becomes real egoism, sort of a form of a narcissism. The last thing we want is for Christian meditation or any of our teachings on mysticism to come across as selfish. No. Selfless. And once the ego gets off the stage, as I mentioned in our first time, then God's got a chance to speak to us in the language of silence. Prayer leads you into wanting to serve and help those who have some need. Correct. Great. Well, we're both on the same level there. Living in the jungles of PNG and in poor areas of Africa, I have been humbled to be welcomed into a simple but deep and loving living faith and kingship with Christ. Yes. Well, that's great to hear that. I must say, the times I have travelled to what we now, it's probably not, shouldn't really call it third world country, but really poor countries. I tell you what, the hospitality is great, and the sense of the community side of it, and the social dimension of being a human being. They're not so individualistic like us Australians. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and we're also one of the most individualistic ones. And therefore we do get lonely, because you're living your life on your own. We're supposed to be living it together, and often you're forced to do that in the COVID-19 pandemic, or if you're in a culture where it's a very poor culture. So well done. The Good Samaritan has always been a favourite parable of mine, but I've never thought of it in the way you have presented it today. Well, I'm only the messenger. It's Pope Benedict XVI. Yeah. That's right. I got a lot out of his commentary on it. And Pope Benedict has got great gifts, and one of his great gifts is he's a biblical theologian. He's we call him perhaps a biblical theologian, I suppose that's the best way. He takes Bible scriptures and he looks at it through the prism of the last 2,000 years of Christian meditation theology. And he brings the best scholarship into that which is given to us by Jesus. We are living in a golden time at the moment of these wonderful books which are bringing Scripture alive to us. And so let's not take it for granted. We're about to finish up, so I'm going to conclude Well, when we recognise our own poverty of spirit, we can become humble enough to learn from our brothers and sisters. May that grow in me. Amen. Thank you. That's very humble. That's right. Recognise our own poverty of spirit. That's true. Our own egoism and selfishness. Thank you. We're all on the same level here. See the Holy Spirit working spontaneously amidst us and allowing the poor to lead us to Jesus. I'd like to conclude, of course, with the passage that we'll all know about as soon as I mention it, chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel. You did it to me. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? So when I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when I was a stranger, when I was naked, when I was sick, when I was in prison, did you come to visit me, feed me, clothe me? When you did it to the least, you did it to me, says Jesus. See how Jesus is placing himself not next to the poor, but in the poor. The litmus test about whether this meditative pilgrimage to the heart is really working in your life and the life of the church is how close we see Jesus in the poor. It's not something that we do patronisingly, but we try, and not only helping them, but to ask the deeper question, why are the poor poor, the structural issues? But the point I want to finish up is that Jesus says, when you've done it to the least, and Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she said, you've got the Gospels on your 5 fingers. You did it to me. She said it's a summary of the whole of the Scriptures. You did it to me. You did it to me. Amen.